Katherine Schweit, who created the FBI's active shooter report, joins the show to talk about potential solutions, plus a look at the flood of post-Bruin gun cases. That and more on this episode of the Weekly Reload Podcast.
I made the devil run. I gave him poison just for fun. I had one friend.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of the Weekly Reload Podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Gutowski. I'm also the founder of thereload.com, where you can head over and check out our membership options today if you want exclusive access to sober, serious firearms reporting and analysis that you cannot get anywhere else. We also have a free weekly newsletter, which you can subscribe to get an understanding of the kind of work we do and see if later on you might want to upgrade to a membership, because that membership comes with a number of perks, including getting this podcast a day early and the opportunity to appear on the show or ask questions in our Q&A episodes. So head on over and check that out today. This episode, we're going to be talking with an expert on active shooting situations, former special agent at the FBI who helped create their active shooter program, Katherine Schweit, who is joining us now. Katherine, can you just give people a little bit more background about yourself who might not know you?
Oh, sure. Yeah, thanks for asking. I'm a Michigander by nature and spent time in Chicago as a prosecutor for the state courts. And joined the FBI. I spent 20 years there working national security matters. And then after the Sandy Hook shooting, as has happened, I got told, hey, you're going to do this. And so I started the FBI's active shooter program and ran it for 5 years. When I hit mandatory, I left the FBI and now I'm in private business consulting and wrote a book about it saying, hey, public, here's what you can do. And do a podcast, by the same name, Stop the Killing. And that's really kind of my mission in between actually paying my bills.
Right. And so you've had a lot of time where you've studied these incidents. And I think, it's great to have somebody with your level of knowledge and expertise on the show to talk about this situation, because everybody wants a solution, right? Everybody wants to have a better understanding of why these happen, what we can do to prevent them, or at least to make them less common going forward, and maybe get an understanding for why we've seen an increase in these sorts of events. And also, there's a lot to talk about, of course, in this topic. The difference between what a mass shooting is and what an active shooter situation is, because they're not necessarily the same thing. And so the FBI just put out their most recent active shooter report last in May here, I believe it was. We did a story about it on the Reload, and they've said there've been almost a doubling of active shooter incidents since 2017. Of course, well, first off, can you just explain what an active shooter incident is, and sort of the square rectangle situation there between active shootings
Sure.
and mass shootings?
Mass shootings, mass killings. And that's really why I wanted to come on your podcast, because you deal in kind of facts and figures somewhat. And that's really great, because everything has to have a why behind it. What's the real numbers behind it? Because this is such an emotional problem that everybody has. They're so emotive about it's such a visceral.
And understandably so.
We need to do that, of course, yeah. Right? Because you're talking about, kids killed in Uvalde and parishioners killed in the South, in South Carolina, and people who are just grocery shopping up in Buffalo, and suddenly this is going on. So it invokes that visceral feeling in all of us. But in order to solve the problem, we really have to have a better understanding of the real facts and figures. So first, to answer your question, mass killing, mass shooting, active shooter, all those different things. I think we start with something simple like serial killer. Oh, what's a serial killer? Serial killer is somebody who does the same thing, but they kill this guy and then they kill another person and then they kill that lady. And, we try to find a serial killer because they're going to repeatedly kill people for whatever pattern. And serial killers generally kill a person or two people, right? So you don't see them in these numbers when we talk about mass killings or mass shootings. So under federal law,
I actually had a serial killer in my neighborhood not long ago, which the police. I always thought it's kind of funny because usually the serial killers get their names from like the media, but the police called this guy the shopping cart killer because he would dump bodies in shopping carts. And they
Yeah.
caught him, thankfully. But
We
yeah,
try not to use those. We hate to
Right.
not. We now know that it's probably not good to put those little name
Probably
monikers
not,
out
yeah.
there because then people say, look, that's me. I want to be that guy.
But
And we
there's
see that-
there's an FBI definition for serial killer, and there's an FBI definition for active shooter. There's not necessarily enough, and for mass killing, right?
There actually, mass
there isn't-
killing is a federal statute, but there's no definition. You're right. There's no definition for mass shooting.
Mass shooting.
Now,
yeah.
mass killing is defined as 3 or more people dead, which could even be the shooter. And that's a
And
federal
didn't it
law
used to be
that was
4?
passed.
And they changed it from 4 to 3, didn't they?
No, let me explain that.
No.
I love that you asked me that because people say all the time, oh, 4 or more, 4 or more.
Mm-hmm.
So if you take those terms that we're talking about, there is a federal definition for mass killing, 3 or more. That's the only time the federal government has identified that 3 or more as a mass killing. And it was really a statute passed, signed by President Obama, passed after the Sandy Hook shooting on the Investigative Assistance Act. Think of the name of it, the Investigative Assistance Act of 2012, and that, or 2012. And that was to give the FBI and DHS authority to help in these kinds of killings, these mass situations. So any situation where there's 3 or more killed, the FBI and DHS can come in at the request of locals, and they're it's a scope of authority. They're protected because they're doing their job. Because as a federal agent, I can only do the jobs that I legally have authority. That's why we're special agents, because special as a lawyer, I can tell you it means limited. If you're special, it means that's a limited authority, where local law enforcement has authority to keep the peace. State and local law enforcement, tribal law enforcement is keeping the peace. The FBI's authority, the federal government's authority for their agents is special, meaning that it's limited. So the Investigative Assistance Act gave us that 3 or more. And what happened is, and serial killer is, the FBI actually did a research project years and years ago in the 90s that said, we'll look at 2 or more. But there's no federal definition for it. But the FBI did a research project on 2 or more people killed and said, any case where we think a person committed 2 or more killings and we think they were serial killer from a behavioral aspect. So then fast forward to active shooters and all these mass shootings, and the media begins to, and I'm not knocking the media at all. I'm just saying they have to articulate what's going on. They are saying, oh, there's this mass shooting or this mass casualty event. We have a hurricane. It's a mass casualty event. We have a shooting. It's a mass shooting event. So mass shooting becomes quite the common term that's used. However, and then what happens is some agencies, some think tanks, I can name a handful of them, were saying that the FBI says a mass shooting is 4 or more. And because that comes from the original research that the behavioral people did on serial killers, where they said we're not talking about any mass shooting situation. There are other researchers who are doing research on mass shootings. Some of them use 4 or more. They literally said it that casually. And then people picked up out of that the FBI thinks it's 4 or more. But the FBI has never, ever done any research on mass shootings and identified it as 4 or more. But if you look that up online, everybody would say it.
Yeah,
So
and
really,
it gets very confusing, all these definitions, I think, for people, because then for a long time in media, you often had mass shooting meaning 4 or more killed in the same incident, and there'd be caveats too for, if you look at the Mother Jones tracker, the Associated Press's tracker, and we had Professor James Allen Fox on previously on the podcast, and he was a great guest and gave a lot of insight too. That's another good episode for people who want to learn more about this subject. But they tend to exclude things like gang violence or robberies, because those are different situations in a lot of people's mind than Uvalde or the Buffalo grocery store mass shooting. So, I think it gets really confusing for people. And then those definitions aren't FBI definitions. Of course, FBI focuses on active shooter, which is a different situation altogether. Well, not a different situation, but it's a different way of looking at these events, right?
What an active shooter, federal definition for active shooter, an individual actively engaged in killing or attempting to kill people in a crowded space. So an active shooter is a subset of what we would think of as mass shootings.
Right.
So if that helps.
Yeah, or it's
so-
kind of broader, really, because you don't actually have to have shot anyone in theory to be counted.
I think that, you're right. I mean, it isn't actually broader because a mass shooting is a shooting. It's not a mass killing, right? So
Right.
I think that's
True.
the confusion, right? An active shooter can be no one is killed at all. It is the idea that there's this shooting in public that
They're
a lot of
trying
people
to.
could potentially,
Yeah.
right, get killed. But a mass killing, the Department of Justice in the last 2 years has said, we need a real definition for mass shooting. And I actually put one in my book based on the Department of Justice conversation. And it says, it's very similar to an active shooter, but it doesn't have the active part, right? So a mass shooting is when more than one person is killed. A mass shooting is when the same thing like active shooter, where you have somebody who's coming into an area and kills. And kills a number of people. And let me distinguish off what these would be. For instance, a family murder suicide in a home, right? And a husband is angry, he kills his wife and 3 kids.
Yeah.
Then he kills himself. You have an entire family, they're killed in a home. It's not an active shooter, but it's going to come up as a mass shooting.
Yeah, and that's actually the most common. And when I've
Right.
examined the numbers personally, like that usually accounts for more than half of those 4 or more people killed at the same time events. Right. They don't get the same sort of coverage that public random
Right.
shooting does, but they actually happen to be, if you're looking at numbers of 4 or more killed or 3 or more killed, if you look at the Gun Violence Archives tracker,
Right.
they give a much more extensive breakdown of these things, and that's what you'll find is most of them are the situations you just discussed, which are still obviously horrific and tragic. They're
Right.
they're different, obviously, than what happened at Uvalde, though. And
So
I think to me, that's what a lot of the problem you get to in media when you're trying to discuss these topics, because the mass shooting counters most media outlets use now are 4 or more people injured in a shooting, which is extremely broad and encompasses a ton of different types of shootings.
Right.
And most of them are likely, criminally involved shootings, robberies, gang altercations,
Or murder
drug sales.
suicides.
Sure.
Right.
And so these are different things.
It's a completely different problem to try to solve,
Mm-hmm.
which is why when I was at the FBI, the FBI's initial research on active shooters, I co-authored why I asked my team of analysts and my other agents, and I had local police officers working with me, why we wanted to pull this subset, because we know what causes gangs, and we know gang shootings, and we know what causes drug shootings, and we know what causes murder suicides and familial issues, domestic issues. What we didn't know is what is this subset of these small, what it was at the time, small shootings. When I started, the first 7 years of our research from 2000 to 2006, we had an average of 6 shootings a year. Last year, using the exact same criteria as your listeners would know, the FBI said there were 61 shootings using the exact same criteria, 61. So we went from 6 when I first started to 61 a year. Which is stupid and ridiculous.
Yeah, it's remarkable.
And it really says that we're not figuring out the problem.
Yeah, I mean, that certainly seems to be the case. I mean, and I will say that I think the active shooter definition from the FBI, the definition that you guys came up with, is a pretty good one in terms of trying to understand the phenomenon and whether it's growing or shrinking or what have you, because one of the fair critiques of using the 3 or more killed standard for mass shooting is it relies, it's really a little bit random, because if you have the same intention and carry out the same act, but you only kill 2 people, you don't get caught up in that. Right? I mean, there's the fair criticism on the high end of the hundreds and hundreds of a year. While that might be an interesting stat to look at over a long time period, although most people haven't been tracking that until the mid 2000s. But
Right.
You're catching a lot of stuff that's not similar to these big mass shootings that people understand as mass shootings.
Right.
But then
Absolutely.
on the other end, it's fair to, I think, to criticize just counting 3 or more killed, because then you're missing out on these scenarios. I guess it's complicated, right? Because the active shooting standard that you guys have come up with at least gets closer to all of the people who are trying to carry out these kinds of attacks, whether or not they actually succeed at them.
You know what? And all the people who are at risk, right? I mean, that's the problem, right? We were looking for, when is the public at risk and where are they at risk? And it doesn't, just because somebody comes in and they're an idiot with their gun because they just bought it and they don't know how to use it very well, and they spray all over and 25 people are injured and only 2 are dead, doesn't mean that wasn't a horrible, horrific situation. Right. And so we were very concerned about what is the threat to the public, and how do we capture everything on the threat to the public? Because when we started out, absolutely, I had people calling me and saying, hey, I think you should use a threshold, because that's what researchers use. Researchers who don't have all the abilities that you guys have to research and data that you can pull from. They said, oh, you should use 3 or more or 4 or more. And I said, we're not using any or more. We're using 0. You can have somebody who comes in who's a horrible shot, but if they come in and they terrorize the world, we don't have a lot of active shooter situations where no one is killed. We usually somebody is killed. Mm-hmm. And I think that was the better number to go with. And now we have 20 some years of data that tells us a lot about, 2/3 of these are handguns that are, 2/3 of them are handguns. We have like 15 incidents involving women out of 300 plus, right? So the data has really helped us to see who is going out in public and doing this, and who's willing to do it, why are they willing to do it, and what their breakdown is, because then our behavioral team down at Quantico is looking at who these particular shooters are. Plus, I will say this about the FBI's data. The FBI's data is based on police reports. And all the researchers, just because of what's available to them, can only look at open source. So it's going to be much more polluted data.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I just think if you're trying to understand this phenomenon of mass shootings, of randomized public attacks, right? Not your gang shootings or drug related shootings or even the family murders that we discussed earlier. Then it does make sense to approach it the way that you have. People need media. Obviously, I'm coming at it from a media perspective, so I think media needs to do a good job of explaining these things, right? And that an active shooter incident doesn't always mean Uvalde or Buffalo.
Right.
But if you want to get a better understanding of why these are they happening more often? Or, what is the makeup of somebody who is trying to carry out an attack like this? Right. What are some of the similarities between them? What are some warning signs? That kind of thing. Then I do think taking that broad approach of it's broad in the sense that it doesn't rely on, body counts, but it's narrow in the sense that it's focused on people trying to carry out randomized public attacks in crowded, areas.
Yeah, and I think it's really important too when people talk about, we want this gun legislation or we want that gun legislation. And again, it goes back to this emotional aspect of it. But obviously, I focus on these most horrific public mass shootings. That's what I was tagged to do initially. But and your listeners know, 2/3 of the firearms deaths in the United States last year were suicides. Mm-hmm. So what is the threat to firearms deaths? It includes a lot of other things. It includes, hey, let's not have all these unsecured guns in homes. Hey, let's look at ways that we can make sure that we, step in when somebody is under duress. We know, right? Mental health issues. People say, mental health. If you're getting mental health care, you're not our threat, probably, right? That's not mental health. But if you're under mental stress, and if you have financial problems, if you have a breakup or a relationship problem, if you lose a job, those are the stressors that are going to send our shooters over the edge.
And is that what you found in your research on this? Those are the sorts of things. What are those? Absolutely. Yeah. What are these?
Those are the biggest categories: mental stress, financial stress. Financial, bankruptcies, financial inability to pay your rent, right? Breakups with emotional problems, breakups with your wife or your partner, and a loss of a job. And, big job challenges. And those may seem like, well, of course, those are everybody's big stressors. Think about it. You put 2 or 3 of those. The FBI found in their research on stressors that everybody had 3 or 4 stressors. There were others certainly, but 3 or 4. Every single shooter in our active shooter study had 3 or 4 of those stressors. That means that there are a lot of people who are stressed around us. Put a pandemic on top of that, right? Put a recession on top of that. Put a job loss. Put not being able to pay your mortgage on top of that, and gas prices going up. All of those things are just little pieces of the Jenga puzzle that take somebody to that edge. And if they have access to a weapon, they may see that as a solution. And that's that trajectory towards violence that we're looking for. You have to look for people who they may be under all these stressors, but then they're planning and preparing. They're angry and they're ready to take it out on the people who have caused these problems that they have. They're ready to take charge and not be the one that's the victim anymore.
Right. Yeah. I think that was something that, James Allen Fox, Professor James Allen Fox had also touched on, this idea of like victimhood being a main driver. Like they feel that they're the victim of these situations and that they're uniquely victimized compared to the rest of the population. And that plays a role in motivation for some of these attacks. You think that's
fair? That's true. I think that's fair. And I think one of the things for a listener to recognize is that I call them brittle people because it's not just that they are victimized, it's that they perceive it.
Yeah.
So they have a real or perceived grievance. Right.
Yes,
so you don't
it might
even
not
know
be real, but this is how
exactly.
they think.
It might be that woman who got the promotion I should have gotten parks in my parking spot every day. And the woman is not even aware of the fact that this guy thought he should have gotten the promotion or that she's taken his parking spot. And that can apply to so many other things. The angry person who is angry that they think you cut in line. They think you pulled into the gas pump station and took their pump when they were going to pull in there. Because you don't know what else is in their background. You don't know what stressors they're dealing with that day. So that's something to consider. It's like, I see a lot of, when we ran the numbers initially, high school shootings, school shootings, middle school and high schoolers, shoot up generally their own schools. And those shootings more often than not by any huge percentage, but more often than not occur on a Monday. And that's probably because those kids are stressed all weekend and they're going back to school and they got to go back to fail geometry again, or to deal with that bully, or to, be alone in the cafeteria or whatever.
And so
there's a lot of different stressors. For
some really tiny percentage of people who face these sorts of issues, it can cause them to, I guess, boil over and go on one of these attacks.
Yeah. And I think that, people say, oh, he snapped. None of these guys snap. I mean, that's a term that from a behavioral standpoint, we say absolutely none of them snap, but something can trigger their limit on the stress. You think about somebody who's really brittle and they have, like they have a backpack on their back, and every perceived, or real grievance they have, they put in the backpack, and it's a big rock, and eventually the backpack just gets too heavy. And that's then that person is, looking for some way to express how angry he is. And that's what happens. Then he starts to plan and prepare, and then he executes.
Interesting. I've heard there's obviously a lot of theories out there as to why these things happen, but one of the ones that I've heard a number of times deals with the similarity between mass shootings or at least it tries to draw similarity between mass shootings and suicide by cop, where these are people who maybe would want to commit suicide, but don't have it in them to do that. And so instead they create a situation where they are more likely to be killed by going out in this way and murdering people at random. Does that fit with what you've studied over the years on this? Okay. It
does. There's a huge percentage. I think 42% of the active shooters in the last 20 years, 18 years. I have to check the numbers to be sure, but 42% of them commit suicide at the scene. And or away from the scene, and many of those would be categorized as suicide by cop. And, there's a whole other layer of suicide by cop, which is somebody who's in trauma, somebody who decides they don't want to live anymore. There are many faiths that say that is it's a sin, a mortal sin to commit suicide. So if you're a faith-filled person and you might not want to commit suicide. Now, how you can kill other people in the process, I don't know how that works in your faith.
Sure.
And there are also people who say,
and these aren't necessarily logical, decisions that are being made here.
Right. I mean, you're going down the lane of, you're losing the logic process. Absolutely. And shooters get in these kinds of situations, this isn't violent. This isn't a violence that is reactive violence because you think somebody's going to kill you, or violence that occurs as part of a crime where you're doing a crime and then, you're at a bank robbery, but then you shoot the guard, because he confronts you or something and you're fearful for your safety. This is a different kind of violence that, and people don't, it's a voluntary thing, and people have to mentally get to a spot where they can do that. And a lot of people can't do that. Just like a lot of people may even think, I don't want to live anymore, but I don't have the guts to commit suicide, which I would hope anybody listening would know. We don't want anybody to commit suicide. There's so many resources, and suicide is a momentary thing, but some people do execute it, and it's incredibly sad because there are so many resources available to help you, even though you might not think so.
Sure. And I guess this dovetails well into my next question, which is, you've talked about, Professor James Allen Fox was maybe a little bit more pessimistic on the prospects of trying to prevent these shootings or arresting this increase that we've seen. But I've read some of your recent writings, and you seem a little more optimistic as to the idea that we could have an impact on this, even if we're trying to, even if we can improve certain areas just by 1%, that could have a cumulative effect that will see, a significant impact. Can you just talk a little bit about what actually can be done realistically to prevent some of these shootings moving forward?
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that question, because I think that everybody wants a solution, but I think that 1% every place, or that 0.5% every place. So that's where I maybe am more optimistic than other people. I feel like we are out there fighting to look for the right solutions, right? And so, for example, I'm old enough to remember when drinking was legal at 18, and then it was illegal at 18, and then it was legal at 18, and then it was illegal at 18 or whatever. And that was us trying to figure out, how stupid is somebody when they're 18 and drinking, and same with the purchase of cigarettes and things like that. And I think that's kind of what we're doing just with the firearms themselves. Now, there's 1,000 other pieces of it, but just with the firearms, for example, there are a lot of little tinkering. There's a lot of little tinkering that's being done in the firearms world. For instance, we have, after now 7 years, we have an ATF head. And there are people who I am friends with who are out in the, as you can imagine, lots of my friends out in the gun world who are saying, if ATF did a better job of enforcing and charging people who are trying to get guns, if ATF could do a better job trafficking, if ATF could do that would keep the hands out of people the guns out of people who shouldn't have out of their hands. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
And so that thing. So maybe that will make a difference. I feel like that's something. Maybe that director at the head of the ATF will make that difference, because they'll make those decisions and they'll charge people who are falsely filing those
straw purchases.
It's escaping me. Yeah, the straw purchases and all of that. All right, so then maybe that's one thing. Maybe the fact that the federal government has now passed something that has to do with funding states to support the red flag laws, something that might be able to take some guns out of some people's hands at a critical time, if the court so deems. Now there's a federal money to go into the states to support that, so that they have the administrative help and the court help, and so maybe that's a little piece that will help take it. And I'm a believer in one person who is taken offline is enough. It's enough because it saves a life or 2 lives or 20 lives or 40 lives, right? So the federal agency, the federal law that was passed, it's going to be these little pieces that we don't know if those little pieces will work. We don't know if they're enough. We don't know if some of them work and some of them don't. But let's try. We're moving forward. We're trying. Mm-hmm. So I think that's, on the firearms part, that's it. But then the public has its own responsibility that it's just not stepping up to do, in my mind, about keeping their weapons secured. Everybody's all, I got to be able to get to my gun. Well, you know what? Your gun in your peanut butter cupboard or your cereal cupboard isn't doing any good when you have an 8-year-old in the house.
Sure.
So, doing a better job of being responsible to own your gun. Don't be the Oxford high school parent who buys your 15-year-old a handgun while he's busy smoking you with his stories. You buy a 15-year-old a handgun, a straw purchase, you give it to him as a gift for Christmas, and then, he's out a week later shooting up his school.
Yeah, there have been incidents like the Oxford and even the July 4th shooting where the parents were sort of actively involved in obtaining firearms for the shooter. Although, obviously these are hard situations, I think, for anyone.
Everyone is individualized.
Yeah.
You have to look at every case individually. But the Highland Park shooter up in Illinois on July 4th, he had a couple of incidents 3 months before his father signed for that FOID card. So
it's true.
Maybe that was, right? And,
I guess
and
the
you don't know until
in the
after
parent
it happens,
situation,
right?
they're probably hoping that, that was just a one-off incident or whatever. And so you can understand
we all think
why
our
somebody,
kids are great.
Yeah, why
Sure.
somebody might end up doing that. But you can also see, hindsight is easy in a lot of these cases, right?
Right.
It's harder at the time.
Absolutely.
And that's something that you've talked about with, you just wrote recently about a mass shooting being prevented in, was it San Antonio, Texas?
San Antonio.
Because somebody had spoken up about the threats that they were hearing from a coworker, right? And you talk about in your piece on that, that the parents had helped or knew that shooter or the potential shooter, this person did not actually carry out an attack, but made a lot of threats to that effect, said he wanted to commit a mass shooting and so forth. The parents might not have, you talk about how the parents might have known he might have some issues and had firearms, but didn't know about the threats necessarily that the coworker knew about, and the coworker knew about the threats, but maybe didn't know about the firearms. And so a lot of times people end up not doing anything in those situations.
Right.
And you're part of what your plan for how to, improve the situation is that people need to speak up more often and quicker, right? Is that the basic idea?
Yeah. About 5 years ago, maybe 6 years ago, I wrote an op-ed piece for the New York Times. And I said, until the public gets engaged in this, until the public takes responsibility for this, we're never going to solve this problem. And that was back when we had, 25% of what we have now in terms of active shooters. So I think the public has not gotten engaged. They all say, my kid would never do that. My husband's a good guy. I will just fire that guy at work. Yeah, that's not a solution. You're just passing your problem off to the community. And so I think until the public gets engaged, so that's the other parts. Maybe we can make some changes in the firearm laws that will make a difference. We don't know until we try some. Maybe we can do a better job at home on an understanding that unsecured guns is part of the reason we have 2/3 of our firearms deaths in the United States are suicides. And of those suicides, the largest bulk, the largest percentage are white rural male shooters, older age. So, maybe you have somebody you're living with who's under stress. Think about the fact that they have access to a handgun and they may solve that.
Sure.
So, and then the public just has to have a better understanding. And I know maybe this is all boring, and to me, it's not. The public has to think about when they see something, they have to say something. They have to be responsible for doing it.
Yeah.
Let me tell you one other thing. One thing that was fascinating. Recently, I was reading. I read too much, and I was reading this research project that the FBI had done, and it said that when people knew about something, or actually this wasn't the FBI, it was another source, but when people heard information and knew about it and called it into this anonymous reporting system, that something like 80% of the time or 85% of the time, that person's information, that was the only person who called that information in. So if you don't call in, if you don't call the local police or your school resource officer or your parish priest or your boss or your HR department or an anonymous reporting system or local police, sheriff, county, FBI tip line, if you don't call, you may be the only one who has that information. Like that woman in San Antonio who called on a Friday, she was worried about the guy, who she was working with who made those kinds of threats. She had no idea. She called in on Monday and said and told him about it, and they arrested him and found out there was so much more planned.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I like your perspective because, I mean, on the one hand, obviously, when you're dealing with firearms laws and that's a fundamental right that, there's a lot of complication that goes into how to handle it.
Sure, I have a firearm.
Right.
I shoot. I go to the range. I go to my sister's house and we shoot in the backyard because that's what you do in a lot of property.
Right, of course. And then on the other hand, like it's easier to see these red flags in hindsight than perhaps it is at the time that they're happening, especially if they're spread apart by a couple of years, right? But I like that you're advocating for people not to become complacent, and that there are solutions to this issue, and that they're multifaceted, right? And that
because I think people say, "Oh, that's never going to happen in my community." Mm-hmm. That thing that happened in Texas was terrible, and then Tuesday they're having tea and toast again.
Yeah, and of course, like. It is difficult, of course. I don't want to underplay how hard it is to prevent these sorts of things, or stop them. It's not, but it is important to note it's not impossible, and that there are things that can be done that even individuals can take to do them. Because and of course, even if you do report something to the police, that doesn't always get followed up on. There's a lot of situations where the FBI or local law enforcement had knowledge of these individuals that carry out the attacks. Sometimes it's not necessarily their fault that they weren't able to follow up because the person hadn't committed a crime. They have limited authority, right? Lines. But
I mean, that's one thing that we talk about on my podcast. Not to do a blatant podcast plug here, but
we'll actually give you time for that.
Free.
But yes.
But but the thing is that what we try to do is we dissect a shooting, and then we say, what did we know beforehand? And what or when could something have been reported? And my co-podcaster she's like a mom from London. Mm-hmm. So she's like a perfect foil for it because she'll say, I wouldn't have called about that. But the public has to be more alert and more aware and more responsible to be part of the solution. They just have to be.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a fair point. And, one more thing here before I let you go. I'm interested in your thoughts on why we've seen this increase. Why has it gone from 6 incidents to 64 incidents over the last 20 years? What do you think is causing that? I mean, something must be different. People are more inclined to take these sorts of undertake these drastic attacks like this, or try to.
I get asked that. It's like the $64,000 question. Why does this keep happening? Why is it getting worse? And I think that it is. I think we've had such a dramatic increase over the last 4 years, and I think that really has a lot to do with we have. Not that maybe listeners want to hear this, but we have an incredible increased number of guns out there. Right, 19 million guns last year purchased. So we have a huge number of guns out there. And so then you compare, 400 million plus guns and put those in the hands of anybody who wants one, kind of, which I know that's not the standard, but so many people who can get them legally. Most of the guns that are used in mass shootings are legally purchased. And then you add on top of that a few years of pandemic, job loss, changes in the economy, people who everything has been upset, where they used to go to the office every day, 9 to 5, or they'd go down to be a mechanic at their local shop. And now the shops are closed. So suddenly they don't get paid because they can't work at home. They're a mechanic, for crying out loud. And so there's massive financial stress, health issues. There have been instability as family members have been sick and died off, and you're having to support other family members. I think all of those stressors have been like on overload. So when I talked earlier about what are the stressors, they're on overload, and then put on top of that, they're all on overload because of the pandemic and because of the economy and because of, and I'm so mad at you. And then I think the third layer is really that we have done a kind of disservice to ourselves by talking on, so much on Twitter and Instagram and every other website about the shooters and kind of glorifying the shooters. And through the years, we've done that by mistake. And when we continue to retweet and ask about why did he do this and why did he do that, and putting his picture up there, the next guy who wants to be the glorified shooter thinks I can gain infamy from it. That's why I never use a shooter's name. They all think they're going to be famous. None of them are famous. Yeah. None of them are famous.
Yeah. When I look at the why, I think it's really hard to answer. There's all three of those are fairly popular explanations that people give to one degree or another. I think they all have some issues, right? Obviously we've had a lot of guns in the United States for a long time. In fact, polling indicates that more people percentage-wise used to own guns.
Yes, and spread out over more households.
Yeah.
Right. We have more guns now, but they were spread out over more households before. But now we're kind of bending back.
And
to
you've
it.
seen,
But you're right.
you saw a period of incredibly low violent crime and murder rates in the United States at the same time that we were also seeing an incredible increase in gun sales. So it's, maybe that's different for these particular shootings. I don't know. But, and then when you get to, there's strengths and weaknesses to all those arguments. And I don't know that I've never heard a perfect one.
Yeah.
The contagion effect or the fame is, there's evidence for that and evidence against it.
I don't know that there's any evidence against it, but I'd be happy if you pointed it out.
Sure. Well, I've read a couple pieces that indicate that. Well, Professor James Allen Fox says that the contagion effect is not something that he notices in the clustering of events are not really statistically.
I get that. I disagree with him on it, but that's okay because that's what researchers do. But let me tell you something about what you're saying that I just wanted to make one more point because I think what you're saying is so important for listeners to remember. A lot of this why is what we call, now I'll be the prosecutor I used to be. It's motive. And it's really easy to get lost on the motive of why somebody did something. Motive is not something we prove in a court of law. We don't care what your motive is. We care if you did it. That's what you get convicted of.
Right.
You could be completely unintending to do something. there certainly is a mens rea, right? There's an aspect of motive in certain types of laws like murder. First degree murder is you anticipated doing that. You went there with the tools. You intended to do that. But in general, what we are looking at and often get lost in is this whole pool of why did this guy do it? Why did he do it? When really what we're looking for is what behaviors did he have that led him to it. We can identify the behaviors even if we can't get inside.
That's a very good point. I think this is a very strong point because you can see those warning signs and then perhaps you can do something about it on the individual basis when it's happening. I think it's much harder to come up with the perfect, unified theory as to why these active shooter incidents appear to be increasing. Right. That's a much harder thing to do. And it may not even be as important as, somebody as informing the public to understand what warning signs to look for. I mean, even the pandemic thing, that one sounds very reasonable to me. and that's something that I would strongly agree with. It makes a lot of sense as far as like, well, the stressors are increasing, then you should expect to see more of these sort of events happening. And but the crazy thing was that in 2020 we had fewer, right? But now that's probably because of the lockdowns.
We didn't though. But we didn't look at the numbers. We didn't have fewer. If you look at the FBI numbers, we didn't have fewer in 2020. It was 30, 30, 40, and 61.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
So, and I didn't know that myself, right? I mean, I'm writing a book during the pandemic, locked here in my dining room because everybody else is all locked down, right? And I'm writing a book, but of course I'm, calling my counterpart at the FBI and saying, hey, what's going on? And they're saying I can't even explain it.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually.
In school shootings.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, no, that's a good point. We had fewer successful ones, fewer successful there's a bad word for it, but
don't use that word, but
fewer attacks where the person was actually able to kill a lot of people, and that was probably because of the lockdowns and fewer crowds around. But yeah, I think that's a good point. We did see a 50% increase from 2020 to 2021, but that doesn't mean that 2020 that just means that there were 30 in 2020, right? Which is not out of line with what we've seen before.
If you go backwards, it was 61, 40, 30, 30. Right. Okay. So do the math on those years, 21, 20, 19, 18, which would have put us right before the pandemic, right? So, but you know what? Something else I wanted to tell you that is one of the reasons why I'm hopeful and other people should be hopeful is when we saw the numbers from the FBI for this year, I was actually the guy who took my job at the FBI. He and I were at lunch the day they released those, and he picked his phone up and he goes, "Oh, they just released the numbers." And when I started to dissect those numbers, one of the things that I noticed is the casualty count is dramatically lower. So I attribute that to, so we may have more incidents, but we have a lower casualty count over the last couple of years. And I attribute that to law enforcement's doing a better job of responding, and the public is doing a better job of, running and hiding and fighting.
Yeah.
We're not going down. We're the guys in the plane crashing in Pennsylvania. We're not going down without a fight.
Interesting.
And so the casualties are like half of what they were, when I started doing this research in terms of, from a percentage standpoint.
That is
so to me, that means we're making ground.
Well, that is a positive note to end on, at least, and a very negative topic generally. But I'm really glad that you came on. I think you offered a lot of really interesting insight into this that you're probably not going to get from anyone else because you've spent a lot of time studying this. But where can people find more of your work on this topic?
So I think that certainly I do have a book out, but I'm not about selling books. Nobody makes any money selling books. If you write a book, you know that. I paid personally to put it up in an ebook, so that in a soft cover, so that that would be available to audiobook. I did. I paid for that, so it's there if you want the book. If you want, you can also listen to the podcast, which is free, right? You can download podcast anywhere, like your fantastic podcast, and all of it you can access through my website. It's KatherineSchweit.com. So if you can figure out how to spell my name, KatherineSchweit.com. I wish my name was Kate Smith.
Me too.
Yeah, KatherineSchweit.com, SchweitCom. Then you can access all of it there. And I appreciate you mentioning that. I will say that I'm all about let's prevent it. Let's prevent it. Let's prevent it. The book, 10 of the 14 chapters in the book are prevention chapters. Schools, churches, businesses, podcasts. We talk about that all the time. We have to find a way to beat this. So that's why I stay optimistic.
Well, I think those are all fantastic resources and people should check them out. And we really appreciate you giving us the opportunity to interview you and have you on. And hopefully we can speak again soon, maybe under better circumstances. Maybe things will continue to trend in a more positive direction. And
that would be great. I'd love to have that conversation.
Yes, that would be fantastic.
That'd be great.
All right.
That'd be great. Thanks for providing accurate information to the public. That's that is our best sword.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having the knowledge to be able to share on this topic. So I really appreciate it. And we'll head over to the news segment now. And we'll have to have you on again in the future. All right, we've got the news segment here for you guys. This week we have a new guest who would introduce you to another part of the Reload family. We have contributing editor Paul Crookston with us this week to go over some of the latest news out there. How you doing, Paul?
I'm doing well. Glad to be on here, and glad to get to talk about this week's set of news.
Yeah. So what do you got for us? What's going on?
All right. So the big news this week is that the lawsuits are rolling in. After the Supreme Court's ruling in New York State Rifle and Pistol Association v. Bruin, several blue states got to work passing more gun control legislation. And gun rights proponents, unsurprisingly, have gotten to work taking them to court.
Yes. There's been a whole flood of lawsuits now. The Supreme Court blew up the gun litigation space, and now you're seeing the fallout from that in the form of these new laws and these new challenges to those new laws. We've got cases in New York, California, DC, Hawaii, right? Legal action all over the place.
Yeah, and I think New York is the star of the show here. That's where the Bruin case was, and New York legislators and the governors seem intent on doing battle with the court a bit here.
Yeah, they're certainly the epicenter, just like they were in the Bruin case, and now they didn't like the outcome of that case, and they seem poised to end right back up at the Supreme Court again, in all likelihood, over these new restrictions that they've passed. Contributing writer Jake Fogelman had a great analysis piece on this new paradigm that we're seeing that you might call shall issue, but may carry, because now a lot of these states are removing their good reason clause, although they are instituting other subjective standards as well. But in place of the old restrictions, they are now putting in far more restrictions on where you can legally carry. New York, especially, has been leading that push. And effectively, they've banned carry in, almost every piece of private property in the state, unless they sort of flip things on their head. Usually, public businesses open to the public are presumptively areas where people can carry in basically every state, except now for New York, where instead of having to put up a sign that says no guns allowed, it will be presumptively off limits, and you'll have to post a sign that says guns are allowed. So that's an interesting novel approach that they're taking, and that the governor has kind of underscored the goal of by saying, the only places it'll be legal to carry a gun in New York are some streets. This is a quote from her. And they've been sued over it now. There's already a lawsuit dealing with that part of the law. I think comes from a very controversial, kind of crazy, frankly, Republican candidate up there. But he's challenged this. I'd imagine that there will be more challenges from perhaps more serious objectors. Maybe some of the gun control groups will get involved, and they're likely to end up back in the court with that. Yeah, with what they're doing on that front.
It certainly seems like a direct challenge to the logic of Clarence Thomas's opinion, because his whole point basically boils down to, we shouldn't treat the Second Amendment like it's a different category of right. And it takes 5 seconds to think about, if there were a million caveats about where and when the First Amendment applied to you, to the point where people are talking about, can we have an online map that has live updates about which places are opening up as a possible zone where you can have a gun? And like you said, the some streets quote from Kathy Hochul, it doesn't take a legal expert to say, well, this clearly is a regime around guns that is completely different from every other right. So it's directly challenging the logic of Thomas's decision in a way that has to be intentional, I would think.
It sure seems that way. I had a whole analysis piece on this last week where it talked about, I mean, this is just, it's a message to the Supreme Court to come and get us again, I guess. Like, we don't care what you ruled last time. I mean, especially there's another lawsuit from perhaps a more established group, the Gun Owners of America, is suing New York as well on their insistence in protecting the subjectivity of these permitting decisions, because sure, they got rid of the good reason clause in name. You don't have to prove you have a specific need that's specialized in order to obtain a permit, but they double down on their good moral character clause. So now, instead of the issuing official judging whether or not you have a good reason to carry on their own subjective merits, they'll judge whether or not you have a good moral character. And they have, instead of a good reason clause, they have a good tweeter clause, is what I'm calling it.
That's good.
Which is where you have to share your social media accounts with the issuing officer, and they will determine if you are a good enough tweeter, I guess. Well, I mean, to be more serious, they're gonna look for things like threats. It's not clear. There's no standard on what they're supposed to look for or what would determine whether or not you qualify as having good moral character. California's done the same thing out there. There's also a reference process in there, sort of like job interview, where you have to provide references to people to tell the state that you are a good person in order to exercise this right. I mean, the Supreme Court, this isn't like a privilege. This is something that they identified as a core right, part of the Second Amendment. So it remains difficult to see how subjective standards like good moral character clauses, or this social media vetting process that they've instituted that doesn't have an objective measure for what would disqualify you, is going to survive a court this sort of court challenge from Gun Owners of America, which is a little more, which frankly, compared to the other two cases going on here, there's another case that was self-filed by a Second Amendment lawyer representing himself against these same good moral character clauses in New York. But the GOA suit is probably a little more likely to succeed, just because they have an actual track record. They're an organized group that has a track record of these sorts of cases and has legitimate wins over time. So anyway, yeah, New York is right back at the center of all this immediately, because frankly, they just didn't accept the they accepted it in the sense that they got rid of their good reason clause, but then it's actually right now, and frankly, I don't think this is going to last that long, but right now it's worse for people in New York who want to carry a gun illegally. It's harder to do it now than it was before the ruling came down, and something tells me that's not going to sit well with these Supreme Court justices.
Yes, I think you're correct. There's also some action out west. California has taken some new gun control measures, and Governor Gavin Newsom signed them. One that there's a court filing over is this advertising ban. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, they banned, or they're targeting advertising that is intended to be targeted at children, or could reasonably be viewed that way. And the governor, in his public speech about this, was pointing to things like the JR-15, which is this scaled down version of the AR-15. It's not an actual AR-15. It's a 22 rifle that's made to look like an AR-15. And it uses, provocative branding, probably with the express purpose of getting sort of outrage attention from people like Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, because there's like the skull and crossbones with a pacifier sort of branding for this gun. Now the gun itself is just literally a semi-automatic 22 rifle with a special integrated child safety lock that comes with a one round magazine when you buy it. But because it looks like an AR-15 and it has this provocative branding or trolley sort of branding, is that's the center of this sort of law. But that's been challenged by the Firearms Policy Coalition and it's really kind of more of a First Amendment challenge. It's First Amendment.
It's actually not. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's filed specifically based on the First and 14th Amendment, correct?
Right. Sure. Yeah. Yeah. The equal sort of due process, and they're using incorporation to challenge this under the First Amendment because it's a restriction on speech, effectively. But there's also another case out of California by I believe it's FPC, if I remembering correctly. They do a lot of California litigation, but and I believe this one was filed with the California Rifle and Pistol Association, which is the NRA affiliate there. Challenging the assault weapons ban.
Yes, and for the record, that the Second Amendment Foundation, SAF, filed the case on this child advertising.
Right.
Thing that we were just talking about.
Good catch there. Yes. So these are some of these groups that we're talking about here are the most active gun rights groups when it comes to litigation. GOA, FPC, SAF, yep. NRA. NRA usually working through its affiliates. The New York State Rifle and Pistol Association is an NRA affiliate.
Yes.
That won that Bruin case. So important to note who's doing this sort of work across the country. But they're challenging the assault weapons ban. Now they're using the Bruin decision in that case as a reason for why the outcome should be different than previous challenges, right?
Yeah. And this is an interesting question because I feel like these cases are going to deal partly with precedent from Bruin, but also partly precedent from Heller to some extent, right?
Yeah, Heller. Bruin builds on Heller, so it makes sense.
Yeah,
but they're using that common use standard that Heller spoke at length about when it came to banning handguns. The AR-15s and similar firearms, what the industry calls modern sporting rifles, what a lot of gun control activists will call assault weapons. Sort of these terms have kind of mushy definitions to them, especially assault weapons. The definition varies from state to state where these bans exist. But AR-15, if you're thinking of AR-15s, the industry claims there's 20 million of those in civilian hands at this point. So they're extremely common. They're the most popular rifle in the United States, that category of rifle, or that style of rifle, the AR-15. And so, a lot of the arguments, but this is not a new argument, but a lot of them have relied on this idea that Heller articulated about a firearm being in common use for lawful purposes. You just can't be banned outright as a category. And so that's what they're relying on. And Bruin adds this new historical test, or a more explicit historical test, which, it'll probably be difficult to find a historical analog to assault weapons bans that dates back to the founding era. Now, obviously it doesn't need to be they don't literally have to have an assault weapons ban, an AR-15 ban back in, 1792, because the AR-15 didn't exist back then, but you'd have to find some sort of law that was similar in nature to ban a very popular firearm in the way that these bans do. And I think that's a high bar. Although we did talk to two experts for this. Our intern, Eric Eva, wrote this story on the assault weapons ban piece, and he got interesting comments from two different experts. I think it was Professor Blackwell argued basically that the Bruin standard makes upholding these laws much more difficult, but we had Professor Robert Leiter from George Mason University, who's also a constitutional law expert, argue that perhaps this doesn't change, or at least this particular argument about common use, the common use standard, might not be successful. And his argument was that these laws have been upheld under a couple of different kinds of reasoning, not just this two-step standard that the Supreme Court has explicitly cast aside. So, well, I guess there's some disagreement there, even among your sort of pro-gun scholars. I would say both of those sort of classify in the pro-gun category, but they have a different take on how successful these will be.
Yeah, I do think it's a really interesting question. So New York has this assault weapons ban that FPC is challenging, and it seems to me like FPC's case is quite strong when you point out that these guns, these quote unquote assault weapons, are really rifles that are in common use, that aren't more extreme in some way, rocket launchers, automatic rifles, that sort of thing. And yet this, to me, I look at the common use standard and I think, yeah, that should invalidate New York's law. But post Heller,
we should clarify that there's two lawsuits against the assault weapons ban, one in California and one in New York,
California.
So just to be clear, there's several of these going on now in the post Heller landscape.
Yeah. So that's the
and
thing,
then there's
right?
another
So
one
to
that was
me,
GBR in Maryland. So the Maryland's assault weapons ban was also now in a post Heller fight, because it was the court literally sent that back down for reevaluation. But go on. Sorry.
I do think it's an interesting question. Why weren't all of these invalidated after Heller in 2008? Like, we're talking about the world of post-Bruin litigation, which, the ball has been moved because of the two-part test being changed and stuff. The ball has moved in a pro-Second Amendment direction, but part of me wonders why the ball wasn't far enough in 2008 to invalidate these kinds of things anyway. I think the argument there is from gun rights advocates is what you saw in Bruin, right? Which is that these lower courts, a lot of them, especially in the more blue-leaning districts, areas, circuits, they use the two-step standard, the two-step review, to just uphold all of the gun control legislation that made it to their, to the final level of appeal. And so now that the court has said, well, that standard doesn't work, I think it opens up renewed scrutiny of these bans that, is going to be much harder for the state to justify under the Bruin test, basically. And so, but as Leiter pointed out, it's not impossible that they could withstand this scrutiny, I suppose. We'll have to see. I guess that's part of how these lower courts respond, and then how the Supreme Court responds to them is really going to tell you everything. Because that was the problem with Heller. At least that was the long-term critique of it was, well, sure, they made this landmark decision, but then when the lower courts did what gun rights advocates argued was ignoring that decision, basically, the Supreme Court didn't take up any of these cases outside of the stun gun one in 2016. And so they just kind of let it fester for a decade, 12 years, really, since McDonald, the 2010 case. But and that's why you didn't see these assault weapons bans getting struck down in that time. So that could happen again, just because the court issues a ruling and even gives out explicit instructions on how to decide Second Amendment cases moving forward. It doesn't mean that lower courts will
follow it to the way that Justice Thomas or gun rights advocates want them to. And so, plus this new standard that relies on historical tradition is a fairly there's a lot of subjectivity in there. You could probably look at Bruen, and if there had been 6 liberals instead of 6 conservatives on the court, even under the exact same standard, you might have come to a different conclusion about whether or not New York's May issue law was had historical analogs that would justify its existence, right? So you're going to see that fight continue, I think, and it's going to determine a lot of what happens. And speaking of Heller, by the way, we had another story. Yes, we talked to Heller. Heller is not just the name.
Heller is a person.
Yeah, it's not just the name of a court case. He's an actual person who's still around.
Yep.
And still extremely active, as you might imagine, in gun litigation. And so I spoke to him about the Bruen ruling, which is basically it's a descendant of his case. That Heller decision is a landmark decision for a reason. It was the first time the Supreme Court recognized an individual right to keep and bear arms was protected by the Second Amendment. And the Bruen decision is a direct descendant of that. And so he was, he said that was, a good way of characterizing it, and that he is not done fighting DC over its gun laws. This is a guy who was, he's motivated by, there were several shootings at his home on Capitol Hill in the 70s. And so now that's sort of what drove him to become more interested in firearms. And then he challenged DC's total ban on handgun ownership in 2008's case when he was actually a police officer at the time, or a special officer. He worked at the Supreme Court's annex actually when he filed that case, and he's filed 4 more since then. Some winning, some losing. Actually, this Bruen standard that relies on history and tradition, that actually came out of a Kavanaugh dissent in Heller's second case that was challenging DC's assault weapons ban. Now Heller lost that case, but he's since won other cases, or at least forced. He actually just recently forced DC to rework its ghost gun ban successfully through challenging it legislatively. He also was able to change their registration process and the rules for that in the wake of the first Heller case. So, he's been very active and fairly successful for somebody who's, filing federal court cases. And now he's back again with another case dealing with, there's a limit on how many rounds of ammunition you can carry on you if you are licensed to carry a gun in DC. You can only have basically 2 magazines for your firearm. So, and then there's a cap of 20 rounds total. So if your gun, the magazine only holds 8 rounds, well, you can only carry 16 rounds. But if my gun has a magazine that holds 10 rounds, I can carry 20 rounds. But he's challenging this whole structure as unconstitutional in the wake of Bruen. So, that'll be interesting to see how that plays out and what DC does. A lot of times DC's tactic has been after they lost in Heller and created, a landmark pro-gun decision that a lot of gun control activists really dislike, obviously. They've been less willing to fight these things all the way to the Supreme Court. That's why DC has a shall issue law. That's why the landmark case here was New York State Rifle and Pistol Association v. Bruen instead of Wren v. DC, because Wren challenged DC's gun carry laws and won, but the DC decided not to appeal and instead just adopted a shall issue law that now is being used as something of a model for the rest of the may issue states now. But so it took a couple years longer to get to the same result, but DC didn't want to be the one on the hook again. And so it'll be interesting to see how they respond to Heller's new suit. There's also a suit about carrying on Metro, on public transit here in DC.
Yes.
There's a separate suit filed by the same lawyer, George Lyon. We talked to him in this story as well. You guys should check it out on the Reload. But that's also being challenged in New York. New York has passed a similar restriction on public transit. You can't carry guns on public transit. Obviously, this is a huge problem for anyone who doesn't own a car and wants to carry a gun in public.
Like me.
And like a lot of low income people as well, right?
I was about to say, this is something that seems to basically
a lot of minorities
target
too.
Poor people, essentially.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so it disproportionately affects minorities as well in these cities, like a lot of these gun restrictions do. But yeah, so there's a whole flood out there. We've got a bunch of pieces on the Reload, but we'll let you guys go. I know this podcast is, I think we've run a little bit longer than normal, so we will be back next week. Thank you, Paul, for joining us. I think we'll have Jake back next week, but it's nice to introduce another face and voice to the audience. Let people know, who's running this whole thing. It's not just me, that's for sure.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
All right. Well, we'll be back next week. Thank you, guys.